If you're into dark humor,
Ow!
family drama,
What the hell is wrong with you animals?
and a raw look at life in the 70s, F is for Family might be right up your alley. Created by comedian Bill Burr and The Simpsons writer Michael Price, this adult animated series follows the daily chaos of the Murphy family, an Irish-American household trying to survive in the fictional town of Rustvale, Pennsylvania. The show ran for 5 seasons on Netflix from 2015 to 2021, and it didn't hold back. With sharp writing and a heavy dose of nostalgia, it delivers a brutally honest yet hilarious take on suburban life.
I wish I was never born!
We finally agree on something!
Complete with yelling dads, broken dreams, and awkward family dinners. What's surprising is how many younger viewers love the show, even though its tone and setting feel tailor-made for Gen X. But that's the beauty of F is for Family. It's relatable no matter your age. So whether you're here for the laughs, the heartbreak, or just some good old-fashioned 1970s dysfunction, this show hits hard in all the right ways. Anyhow, without further ado, let's begin. The episode opens on a quiet cul-de-sac in the fall of 1973. Frank drives home from work just in time for dinner. As the Murphy family sits down to eat, each member shares details about their day. Just as Frank begins to talk about his own, the phone rings, much to his irritation. He refuses to answer at first, but eventually gives in when he can no longer tolerate the ringing. On the call is a Bible salesman,
I don't need a goddamn engraved family Bible!
whom Frank angrily curses out before slamming the phone down and retreating to the garage. There, he takes his frustration out on his punching bag until Philip rides up on his bicycle, asking if Bill can come out and play. Frank responds by yelling at him. Later, Frank hears about an upcoming boxing match on TV and becomes excited at the idea of inviting his neighbors over to watch it. However, when he brings it up to his friends, he learns they've already been invited to Vic's house to watch it on his color TV. Jealous and frustrated, Frank impulsively decides to buy a color TV of his own, using Kevin's college fund to pay for it. Meanwhile, Bill works on a science project involving magnets and their effects on different surfaces. Out exploring with his sister Maureen and friends Kenny and Ben, Bill runs into trouble. First with grumpy neighbor Mr. Holtenwasser, and then with bully Jimmy Fitzsimmons. Jimmy traps Bill up in a tree and shoots at him with a pellet gun. Maureen runs off to find Kevin, who arrives just in time to confront Jimmy and rescue Bill. The next morning, Bill accidentally breaks the new color TV while testing his magnet on it. Panicked, Kevin tells him to go back to bed and pretend he knows nothing about it. Later, Frank and Sue try to return the broken TV, but are turned away and humiliated at the store. Back at home, they confront the kids, and after some hesitation, Bill admits what he did. As punishment, Frank and Sue take him back to the electronics store to explain himself and apologize. There, Bill is harshly scolded and dismissed by Chuck Sawitsky. Frustrated, Bill secretly rubs the magnet over every TV in the store. As a result, Chuck's father mistakenly believes the entire shipment is defective. To fix the situation, he offers the Murphys a replacement from a different brand. This allows Frank to finally host his much-anticipated fight party. That night, just as the party is about to begin, Frank receives a phone call from work. He's informed that his boss, Ed, has died.
He's dead?
Shocked at first, Frank quickly realizes the silver lining. He's being promoted to Ed's old position. The episode ends with Frank celebrating both his new color TV and his unexpected promotion. The episode begins with Sue confronting Kevin over a failure notice from school. Kevin, however, shows no concern about potentially failing all his classes. As he argues with Sue, she also breaks up a fight between Bill and Maureen. When Frank pulls into the driveway, Sue chooses to hide the notice until after dinner. Frank, who had a rough day helping Ed's widow clear out his locker, ends up arguing with Kevin. Kevin then reveals the failure notice and insults Frank, prompting Sue to send him to his room while Frank storms off to hit his punching bag. On Saturday morning, Frank gets called into work. Believing Kevin lacks discipline, he brings him along to teach him a lesson. He puts Bill in charge of watching Maureen while Sue focuses on organizing her plastaware orders. Frank sternly warns Bill not to let anything happen to her, threatening harsh consequences if she gets hurt. At the airport, Frank visits Bob Pogo to discuss a potential strike, and receives company football tickets. Meanwhile, Kevin, left alone in the break room, wanders into the baggage area and meets Carl and Red. They show off by stealing from luggage, taking medication from a woman's bag. When the woman complains to Frank, Kevin, now horrified after seeing footage of a former manager's gruesome death, returns the stolen pills. The woman continues to berate Frank until Kevin, fed up, shouts at her to shut the f*** up.
Shut the f*** up!
Standing up for his father in a surprising moment of loyalty. In the car, Frank tries to scold Kevin, but ends up admitting that what Kevin did was actually pretty funny. Kevin apologizes for not appreciating the value of Frank's job, and Frank, moved by the gesture, invites him to the football game. Meanwhile, Maureen sneaks away from Bill to engage in risky activities with Kenny and Ben. She narrowly avoids getting hit by Mr. Holtenwasser's car while playing on a makeshift slip and slide. Later, after falling out of a tree and having the wind knocked out of her, Bill explodes in frustration. His outburst causes Maureen to cry, but it also gets through to her, and she quietly asks Bill to carry her home. Back at the house, Sue finishes organizing her plastaware orders while her family is out. After completing everything on her checklist, she finds herself with nothing left to do. Feeling empty and overwhelmed, she breaks down and cries into a plastaware bowl. Later, she opens up about her feelings to Major, offering him slices of cheese to convince him to stay and listen. Frank receives a phone call from Kevin's school informing him that Kevin hasn't turned in his incomplete assignments. Realizing Kevin lied, Frank decides to disinvite him from the Rusty's football game and take Bill instead. An angry Kevin, who has spent the morning painting his face, confronts him, but Frank sternly tells him that half of the assignments better be finished by the time he gets home, then drives off. At the stadium, Frank and Bill discover they're seated with Roger Dunbarton, CEO of Mohican Airways, and his wife, Brandy. Roger quickly begins to befriend Frank, and when Bill needs to use the washroom, Brandy offers to take him. As she leads Bill away, Roger tells her not to eat any hot dogs, claiming she's getting fat and threatening to cut her off. In defiance, Brandy secretly devours a hot dog while Bill enters the restroom. Inside, Bill is horrified by the unsanitary conditions of the trough, and returns to his seat silently, visibly shaken. On the way home, Frank and Bill run out of gas, but Rosie, who happens to be at a nearby bar, helps them out. When Bill casually mentions talking to Dunbarton at the game, Rosie grows suspicious and starts thinking Frank is no longer on their side. Meanwhile, Sue takes Maureen to the mall, leaving Kevin at home to finish his assignments. At the mall, they run into Ginny, who talks endlessly about her crumbling marriage. As the mall prepares to close and Sue tries to leave, Ginny accuses her of not understanding what it's like to have real problems, insisting Sue's life is perfect. Frustrated, Sue snaps and reveals that her life is far from perfect, even admitting she sometimes wishes she never got married. She grabs Maureen and storms off. Back home, Kevin meets up with Bolo and Lex to smoke weed. He brings along a double album to roll joints on, unaware it's one his parents used to play for him when he was a kid. While high, Kevin hears the music and reflects on how close he once was to his dad, remembering Frank telling him he'd always love him. The memory hits hard, inspiring Kevin to keep his promise to pass school. After a near run-in with the police, Kevin races home just before the rest of the family returns. He quickly puts on the record and pretends to study. As the family settles in, worn out from a chaotic day, they calm down and watch TV together, quietly sharing a rare moment of peace. Kevin, Bill, and Maureen sit together in the living room, watching a cheesy Halloween movie on TV. In the kitchen, Vivian presents Sue with an answering machine as a prize for being the #1 saleswoman for September. She then offers Sue a promotion that would pay her in actual money rather than free plastaware bowls. Sue hesitates, unsure how Frank would feel about it. Just then, Frank walks in, excited to share some big news of his own. Vivian steps out, but not before running into Vic, who awkwardly reminds her of a past encounter they had when he was a student and she was a lunch lady. Frank tries to tell the family about receiving the tie tack of excellence from Mr. Dunbarton, but they are too distracted by the novelty of the answering machine to pay attention. During dinner, they receive their first message on it, a voicemail from Bob Pogo demanding that Frank address an employee slow down at the airport. Meanwhile, Bill is looking forward to Halloween, but Jimmy Fitzsimmons threatens to beat him up if he wears a costume. Bill calls Philip, and they decide to go out in costume anyway. However, when Bill is spotted by Jimmy and his crew, he gets beaten up while Philip hides in his house, too scared to help. Bill manages to escape and run back inside, but Jimmy warns him that if he steps outside again, the beating will continue. Meanwhile, Kevin struggles to focus on his history assignment due to the constant noise in the house. Hoping for quiet, he decides to walk to the library to finish his last question, but gets sidetracked by his friends. While drinking with them, Bolo unknowingly helps him by reading presidential trivia off a White House beer can. To Kevin's delight, this happens to be the answer he needs. Declaring himself a genius, he finally completes his homework.
Done. I'm a fucking genius.
Frank answers the phone instead and lies, telling Vivian that Sue isn't interested. He then rushes off to the airport before Sue can find out. While showing his co-workers how the new answering machine works, he realizes with horror that it records every phone call. He bolts home, but it's too late. Sue has already heard the message, and, furious, leaves him alone on Halloween. Frank struggles to handle the kids and the tension at home. Desperate, he tricks Maureen into coming with him to help search for Sue. He eventually finds her at the batting cages where she confronts him. Sue tells Frank that she took the job, and he's going to have to learn to accept it. At school, Bill gets revenge on Jimmy by sucker punching him and breaking the birdhouse he just made in shop class. Jimmy challenges him to a fight, but Maureen jumps in instead, which leads the entire student body, and even Jimmy's father, the school janitor, to mock Bill, dubbing him a pussy.
Pussy! Pussy!
Bill is taken to the principal's office and gets suspended from school. When he brings the suspension from home, Kevin forges Frank's signature to keep their parents from finding out. Maureen witnesses this and uses it to blackmail Bill into doing whatever she wants. The next day, Bill hides in the bushes and waits for Frank and Sue to leave. Once they're gone, he sneaks inside and spends the day watching TV. While snooping around in his parents' room, Frank and Sue unexpectedly come home, forcing Bill to hide under their bed. While trapped, he overhears a heated argument in which Frank refers to him as a pussy, deeply hurting his feelings. After the tension subsides and they make up, Bill is horrified to remain stuck under the bed as his parents have sex. At dinner that night, a visibly shaken Bill vomits all over the table when Frank casually mentions he had one hell of a workout before supper.
Yeah, had a hell of a workout before supper.
Meanwhile, Kevin earns a C in history. To reward his effort in improving his grades, Sue promises that she and Frank will take him to see Shire of Frodo in concert. She pressures Frank to ask his union friends for tickets during the negotiation meeting he is headed to. While Bill skips school and Sue is overwhelmed at work, Frank's union negotiations collapse. Unable to secure tickets through the union, Frank turns to Vic for help instead. At the concert, it's revealed that Shire of Frodo is only the opening act for Lifted Riffs. They're quickly booed off the stage as the crowd demands the headliners. Back home, Bill finally stands up to Maureen's blackmail and constant insults. He pushes his surprised sister down and shouts that he hates her and their family, then storms out to find Jimmy, determined to prove he's not a coward. Concerned, Maureen and Major follow him, apologizing and trying to stop him, but Bill is set on getting even. In the woods, Bill accidentally ignites Jimmy's hidden fireworks stash with a road flare, causing a massive forest fire. When the family arrives home and sees the fire blazing in the distance, Bill approaches Frank and asks him to sign something, leaving Frank horrified by what he sees. After Bill accidentally burns down the forest, the fire chief lets him off the hook, calling the blaze an accident. Furious but protective, Frank shoos away the nosy neighbors, defending his son outside. Once inside, though, he confronts the pyromaniac, demanding an explanation. Bill confesses that he was only trying to prove Frank wrong after being called a little pussy. Caught off guard, Frank insists he never said that. At that moment, Kevin, still in his cape and top hat, struts in, declares himself the good son, grabs a beer, and walks off. Exasperated, Frank throws a pack of cigarettes at Bill and sarcastically tells him to be useful and go light Kevin's cape on fire. On Christmas Eve morning, Frank decides Bill's punishment will be to serve as an altar boy. While Sue decorates the house for their Christmas party, which quickly spirals into chaos, Frank drops Bill off at the church and heads to a meeting. Bill's fellow altar boy turns out to be Jimmy Fitzsimmons. During their duties, Jimmy tries to convince Bill to help him break into a safe. When Bill refuses, Jimmy prepares to hit him but slips on spilled wine. Bill bolts out of the church and runs home. chased by a furious Jimmy. Meanwhile, Maureen spends the day searching for Major, who ran away after being frightened by the explosion. As she searches, Kevin takes on a job selling Christmas trees for the Sawitskis. Chuck refuses to pay him unless he sells the last 2 trees, which no one wants. Frustrated, Kevin throws one of the trees, accidentally smashing someone's windshield. At the pizza parlor, Frank attends the union negotiation meeting. Bob, Pogo, and Dunbarton are prepared to sign the agreement to prevent the strike. However, when Frank hands out pens, Dunbarton's wife, Brandy, asks for one. Frank tells her the pens are for Pogo and Dunbarton only, which offends Dunbarton. As a result, Gagliardi and Rosie angrily call the strike on Mohican Airways. Back at home, the entire Murphy family is unraveling. Frank, overwhelmed by the strike, explodes in frustration. Maureen, heartbroken from failing to find Major, begins sobbing. Kevin arrives carrying a Christmas tree and demands money from Frank before he gets sued over the broken windshield. Things worsen when Bill rushes in, announcing that Jimmy is going to kill him. Moments later, Jimmy and his father arrive and demand Frank take control of his psycho kids. The two families exchange insults until tensions erupt into a full-on brawl. The Murphys ultimately win when Sue grabs a baseball bat and drives the others away. Surprisingly, the chaotic fight brings the family closer together. Their spirits lift further when Mr. Holtenwasser returns Major safely. That night, as Frank watches news of the strike protest on TV, he realizes he needs to step in and take action. Frank delivers a heartfelt and powerful speech that surprisingly wins over Dunbarton, leading to the strike being called off. However, as the crowd disperses in the parking lot, Pogo pulls Frank aside and informs him that he's been fired. Furious and humiliated, Frank decides to get even. He steals his boss's keys, drops them just out of reach on the ground by the car, and jams a pen into the door handle. Due to his obesity, Dunbarton is unable to retrieve the keys or open the door, ultimately trapping him inside the car overnight on Christmas Eve. Frank returns home later that night, exhausted and disheartened. He lights a cigarette and has a brief conversation with Vic, whose wild Christmas party has already ended. Vic confesses that despite his flashy lifestyle, he envies the family life Frank has. He admits he's considering a change and ponders the idea of settling down. As Frank heads inside to face his family and friends, Vic stays behind, playing cheerfully with a decorative reindeer on the lawn. Though fired and unsure about what comes next, Frank prepares to rejoin his loved ones, who, despite the chaos, still stand by him. The scene opens with a flashback to 1958, when Sue and Frank have just begun dating. Frank waits outside Sue's sorority house, chatting with a young boy as he sits in his car. He hands the boy $1 and jokingly tells him to treat his folks to dinner. Flash forward to January 1974. Frank, now unemployed and disheartened, sits slumped in the station wagon while Sue attends a Plastaware party, trying to make sales. As he waits, a neighborhood boy mocks him, prompting Frank to angrily cuss him out. A disappointed Sue exits the house, having failed to sell anything, and asks Frank to help carry her unsold products. While he gathers the boxes, she sneaks a cigarette, only to be by the same boy. Frustrated, she tells him off and throws her cigarette at him. Back at home, with financial strain growing heavier, Sue suggests they take advantage of the snow day to enjoy a break from their worries. The family heads to a local sledding hill for some fun. While there, Frank and Sue run into Vic, who introduces his latest girlfriend, and Ginny, who now appears to be thriving. Meanwhile, Maureen disobeys Frank's orders and sneaks off to play with Ben and Ken. At the same time, Bill and Philip are once again tormented by the ever-present school bully, Jimmy. Despite the momentary attempt at family fun, tension and unresolved problems linger beneath the surface. Kevin meets up with his friends, who tease him for being a virgin, prompting him to go talk to Claire. Just like in the past, she appears to reciprocate his feelings and invites him over. Meanwhile, Ben and Ken use a cinder block to break the ice for sledding, and Jimmy sends Bill tumbling down the hill. Bill crashes into Maureen, hitting her in the face, and then trips Kevin, who falls into a newly formed hole. The sudden contact with icy water triggers a panic attack for Kevin. Frank initially tries to calm him down, but rushes to Maureen instead after seeing her bleeding eye, unintentionally dropping Kevin, who falls into the hole again, this time going completely under. The family quickly rushes to the hospital. Frank demands immediate help for Maureen, completely overlooking Kevin's hypothermia. In the chaos, Frank's furious rant to Nurse Beatrice causes him to faint. Later, in an attempt to make up for the disastrous outing, Frank suggests the family go out for dinner. The mood improves, and the Murphys enjoy a rare moment of harmony until Frank realizes he can't afford the bill. Sue discreetly slips him the money to avoid public embarrassment. That night, however, the anxiety about their worsening financial situation creeps back in for Sue. Just as things seem hopeless again, Frank receives an unexpected call from Bob Pogo, asking for a meeting, offering a small glimmer of hope. The scene opens with a flashback to 1958, where Sue's friend and sorority sister Gertie mistakes Frank for a pervert as he waits outside in his car for Sue. Sue calms her down, saying she feels like she could have everything when she's with Frank. Back in 1974, Frank prepares to return to work while Sue cheerfully files away the stack of past due bills. Downstairs, she tells Maureen that she has to deliver plasticware, but will be back in time for the Honeybee Scout meeting. Frank promises Bill new hockey gear for tryouts. When Kevin asks for a new guitar, Frank flatly refuses. Still hopeful, Frank heads to his meeting with Pogo, only to find out he can't be rehired. He's been replaced by Dunbarton's nephew, Scoop,
Give your job to a shit for Brain's nephew, Scoop.
and is instead asked to train him without pay. Crushed, Frank goes drinking with Rosie, who gives him a vending company business card for a possible new lead. Meanwhile, Kevin tries to talk to Claire again, but she's lost interest after the skating rink fiasco. Along with Bolo and Lex, she mocks Kevin over his fear of drowning. Even Bill gets in a jab as he passes by. Kevin lashes out by punching Bill in the stomach and tossing his hockey stick into a tree, shocking his friends. After school, the brothers fight again when Bill takes one of Kevin's records. Bill retaliates by mentioning he caught Kevin. Sue breaks up the fight and forces them to stay in their room without speaking. That night, still stuck in the room, Bill shares his plan to get a paper route to help the family. Kevin replies that he'll help by becoming a famous musician. While this unfolds, Sue deals with an unreasonable customer and fantasizes about a simpler life. After learning that Frank didn't get his job back, she takes the initiative to ask Vivian for a recommendation, and secures a secretary position at Plastaware's head office. Frank promises to visit the employment office to find work, but when he arrives, he's too embarrassed to stay and quietly returns home instead. Once there, he breaks down sobbing, only to be seen by Kevin, who is skipping school. The two argue, with Kevin admitting that school is too hard and that he can't even focus on music, the only thing he enjoys, because Bill keeps invading his space. In a rare moment of connection, Frank decides to help by turning the cellar into Kevin's private bedroom. Things seem to improve between them until Sue gets home. Frank lies to her about where he'd been, despite telling Kevin earlier that a real man never lies. Kevin looks at him with disappointment, and Frank is crushed by the loss of his son's trust. With no other options left, he reluctantly calls the vending service Rosie recommended. Meanwhile, Sue starts her new job as a secretary and quickly finds the office environment to be blatantly and overly. She begins to speak up, but Vivian intervenes, demonstrating how to communicate with the men on their own terms. Though Sue is uneasy with this approach, Vivian warns her that she'll lose the job if she doesn't adapt. Across town, Bill begins his paper route to earn money for a new hockey stick. Things go smoothly until he tries to collect his pay and discovers he's actually been used as a drug mule, just happy to have earned some hard cash. Vic is called to the Waterbridge Mall to handle a situation involving DJ Hank Howland, who refuses to play the Corey Mars record during a meet and greet at the record store. Vic resolves the issue by bribing Hank with cocaine, an act witnessed by Kevin and his friends who are shopping nearby. That night, the boys finish recording their first song but feel hopeless about anyone ever hearing it. Bolo suggests they take his mother's car and try to buy cocaine, hoping to bribe Hank into playing their tape on air. They approach a man they assume is a drug dealer and give him their only $10, only to realize too late that he's a pimp and they've accidentally paid for a. Horrified by the situation, they flee in a panic. Ready to give up, they spot Frank searching the roadside for spare change, which unexpectedly inspires Kevin not to quit. He storms into the radio station and insists Vic and Hank listen to their tape. Vic agrees. Meanwhile, Frank starts his first night on the job with Smokey, who's training him on how to stock vending machines. Smokey makes it clear that Frank is only on a trial run and needs to prove himself. Things go smoothly at first, but Frank forgets to lock the truck's back door, causing all the change to spill onto the road. Refusing to give up, he scrambles to retrieve every coin. Impressed by Frank's effort and grit, Smokey officially hires him. Back at home, Sue is dealing with a broken washing machine alongside Bill and Maureen. As she hangs up dripping wet laundry, she remembers Frank's soggy lettuce from dinner and suddenly gets an idea: to invent a spin dryer for lettuce. Frank later confronts Vic, trying to dissuade him from encouraging Kevin's dream, insisting that dreams only lead to disappointment, something he knows from failing to become a pilot. Kevin overhears this and angrily fires back, resulting in an argument where they both blame each other for never reaching their goals. Determined to prove his father wrong, Kevin sneaks out to play the show. Frank follows and finds him performing at a nursing home where the uninterested elderly audience barely reacts. Yet Frank still appears quietly proud. In the parking lot, he tries to explain to Kevin why dreaming big often leads to heartbreak. But their conversation is interrupted when a girl from the audience approaches to say she was impressed by the performance. Encouraged, Kevin and his friends feel they're headed for fame. Kevin asks for a few minutes to talk to the girl, and Frank reluctantly agrees, though deep down, he still fears his son will be let down. Meanwhile, Bill finally saves up enough money to buy a hockey stick, but has some of his cash stolen by Jimmy Fitzsimmons. When Randy shows up and scares Jimmy off, he scolds Philip for not stepping in to help. Bill then asks Randy for financial help, but Randy refuses, worried Jimmy might just steal from him again. With the cheapest stick now too expensive due to inflation, Bill sorrowfully decides to steal it. However, he gets caught by the store owner, who demands his name. Tearfully, Bill lies and says he's Jimmy Fitzsimmons.
Jimmy Fitzsimmons?
Before the owner can ask for a phone number, Philip knocks him over with a snowboard, accidentally detaching the man's prosthetic leg. The boys flee, leaving the owner behind, yelling, "Jimmy Fitzsimmons!" in rage. That night, Bill and Philip watch as Jimmy gets beaten by his father and is sent off to military school, unaware of what really happened. At work, Sue pitches her salad tosser idea. While the executives are briefly intrigued by the concept, the mood shifts when they see her homemade prototype. Kevin gets ready for his appointment with Haircut Girl that afternoon, and to pass the time, he decides to awkwardly practice. When he finally gets to her house, things go south quickly. He prematurely and accidentally hits her in the face during the climax. She immediately kicks him out. Humiliated, Kevin heads home only to find himself locked out. That's when Cutie Pie spots him from across the street and, noticing his disheveled state, invites him inside. There, the two have Vic's couch. Meanwhile, Frank makes one of his vending machine stops at the airport, where he runs into Bob Pogo. Bob is visibly distressed and vents about how much pressure the Dunbartons are putting on him. Frank, trying to keep things professional, sympathizes but reminds Bob that he's got candy and cigarettes to restock. Lured by temptation, Bob hides inside Frank's van and devours a stash of stale candy bars. Later, while riding along on Frank's vending route, Bob proposes a scheme to get Scoop fired, so that Frank could be rehired by Dunbarton. Frank refuses the offer and leaves Bob behind as he goes to stock machines at the high school. However, Bob's gluttony catches up to Frank. He returns to the van to find that Bob has eaten the entire inventory. Furious, Frank kicks Bob out and drives off. When he gets home and checks his balance, he realizes he doesn't have enough money to cover the lost goods. Desperate, he secretly takes $160 from Sue's hidden stash of emergency cash. At the Plastaware office, Vivian comes across Sue's discarded sketches of the salad tosser and becomes intrigued. She expresses genuine interest in pitching the idea to Plastaware's founder, Henrietta, which excites Sue. Vivian tells her that in order to move forward, she needs to come up with $150 to fund a prototype for the presentation. Later, Sue is devastated to learn that Frank has already taken her emergency savings. Determined to pursue the opportunity anyway, she makes a painful decision and pawns the locket Frank gave her on the anniversary of their first date to gather the money. Meanwhile, since Frank is busy with work that morning, Bill is forced to ride his bike alone to hockey tryouts. On the way, he crashes and breaks his stick, leaving him feeling frustrated and abandoned. This sparks a rebellious shift in his attitude, which disappoints Philip, who had been encouraging him. Elsewhere, Maureen puts the final touches on her Honeybee Scouts poster and prepares to head to her meeting. When Frank doesn't show up to drive her, she starts walking. Mr. Holtenwasser notices her on the road and offers a ride. At the meeting, Maureen confidently gives a presentation on computers. However, the scout leader dismisses her work for being too futuristic and unrealistic. Frustrated but undeterred, Maureen asks Mr. Holtenwasser to speak. He shares a heartfelt heartfelt story about surviving Auschwitz and immigrating to America, lending gravity and respect to Maureen's presentation. Sue visits Plastaware headquarters to present her salad tosser idea to the company's founder, Henrietta Van Horn. At first, Henrietta belittles Sue, questioning her credentials and the practicality of the prototype. However, Sue stands her ground and delivers a heartfelt speech about the obstacles she overcame to bring the idea to life. Touched by Sue's passion and persistence, Henrietta changes her tone and takes genuine interest in the concept. Meanwhile, Frank calls in sick so he can buy an anniversary gift for Sue. While at the mall, he gets delayed by a long conversation with Ginny, who vents about her personal issues. Eventually, Frank returns home with a crystal ashtray and gets ready to take Sue out. Before they can leave, the school calls regarding Maureen, and the couple rushes to the principal's office. At school, the principal and Maureen's teacher accuse her of cheating on a math test by copying answers from a boy named Scott Ichikoa. Maureen denies the accusation, but the stress quickly escalates into a heated argument between Frank and Sue. In the process, it is revealed that Frank took money from Sue's secret savings, and Sue pawned the locket Frank gave her. Their loud confrontation is so intense it causes Scott to break down and confess that he was actually the one who cheated. Although Maureen is cleared, the tension between Frank and Sue remains unresolved, and their marriage seems to be hanging by a thread. Meanwhile, Kevin gets kicked out of Cutie Pie's house when she realizes he's only 14 and panics over the legal and moral implications. She threatens him not to tell Vic. Later, Kevin and his bandmates run into Vic on the way home. Vic invites them to play at one of his upcoming parties, and though Kevin is silently racked with guilt, he doesn't say anything. At the same time, Bill skips school with Philip, frustrated by his job and Frank's recent treatment of him. While out playing, Bill decides to prank drivers by stuffing clothes with leaves to look like a person getting hit by a car, specifically meant to resemble Frank. Philip warns him that it's dangerous,
We can't do that. It's dangerous.
but Bill mocks him and shoves him down, ending their friendship. That night, the Murphy family lies awake, weighed down by secrets, arguments, and tension. Everyone except Bill, who sleeps soundly, unaware that Jimmy Fitzsimmons has just returned from military school. Frank and Sue's marriage is hanging by a thread, and to fix things, Sue suggests they attend a couple's retreat hosted by Father Pat. Frank immediately scoffs at the idea, brushing it off and insisting he has more pressing matters. He leaves for a secret meeting with his old co-workers from Mohican Airways, where they discuss a scheme to oust Scoop, Dunbarton's nephew who took Frank's former job. Frank promises Sue he'll meet her for lunch to talk things out, but when he finally does, he's cold and dismissive. Everything changes when he notices Sue's handwritten notes and sees the word co-pilot. It sparks a powerful memory. When Sue first became Kevin, both of them feared their dreams were over, but Frank reassured her they'd face it together, calling themselves co-pilots, vowing to support one another through life. That promise, however, has long since faded, and Frank realizes he hasn't been honoring it, especially as Sue has begun chasing her dreams again. Still, by the time this hits him, Sue has moved on emotionally and is too preoccupied proudly showing off her salad tosser to even listen to him. With no other choice left, Frank finally agrees to go on the marriage retreat. Back at home, Kevin tries to talk to Frank before he leaves, weighed down by guilt, but Frank, in a rush, brushes him off, assuming it's about the band again. Later that day, Kevin and his bandmates meet with Vic to plan the upcoming party. Vic gushes over Kevin, calling him talented, honest, and full of integrity. The praise cuts Kevin deeply. Overwhelmed by guilt about what happened with Cutie Pie and Vic's unknowing admiration, Kevin spirals into self-hatred, even contemplating suicide. Meanwhile, Jimmy Fitzsimmons is on his own strange redemption arc. Having just returned from military school, he begins visiting people he's wronged to apologize. When he gets to Philip, however, Jimmy finds out the truth. It was Bill and Philip who got him sent away in the first place. Enraged, he storms off to find Bill, but is stopped just in time by his father, preventing yet another round of chaos. Frank and Sue head off to the couple's retreat, but Frank clearly isn't thrilled to be there. He rolls his eyes at the therapy exercises and refuses to talk about his feelings, believing that a man should keep his problems to himself. But after some pushing and awkward group sharing, he finally opens up. He admits that he hasn't been supportive of Sue chasing her dreams because he was jealous. She still had hope, something he felt he'd lost when his own dreams died. Sue is stunned, not expecting such raw honesty from him, and they end up in a shouting match right in front of the group. The argument gets so intense that Greg blurts out he's Ginny immediately denies it, claiming he's just confused and completely ignores what he said. Back at home, Bill is still hiding from Jimmy Fitzsimmons. When he sees Philip doing the same, he remembers Maureen's advice and awkwardly apologizes. Philip forgives him, explaining that he already worked through his anger by disemboweling Bill in his diary. He then shows Bill his notebook, which is filled with disturbingly creative and violent sketches, many featuring Bill, but also some starring Jimmy. Inspired, Bill asks if Philip has one where Jimmy dies, and they both hatch a plan. With Ben and Ken's help, they plan an elaborate ambush. Jimmy will chase Bill and Philip on his bike, get tripped by a rope, land in a wheelbarrow, and be pelted with rocks before being rolled into a porta-potty. But things go south quickly. Jimmy avoids the trap entirely and instead gets hit by Randy's van. Everyone except Bill panics and runs away, but Bill, surprisingly, decides to help and takes Jimmy to the hospital. Meanwhile, Bolo and Lex are hyped for their big performance at Cutie Pie's birthday party, but Kevin is still drowning in guilt. He tries to come clean to them, but they cut him off, warning him not to ruin their one shot at fame. Kevin reluctantly agrees and goes along with the show, but on stage, the weight of his actions overwhelms him. He breaks down mid-performance and launches into a long, rambling piano ballad confessional about everything. His guilt, the relationship with Cutie Pie, and how he betrayed Vic. Unbeknownst to Kevin, Vic has just lost his job and has been doing lines of cocaine all day. He's sweating, furious, and emotionally unstable. When Kevin's onstage monologue reaches the part about Cutie Pie, Vic turns to her and demands to know if it's true. She timidly admits it, and Vic absolutely snaps. He pulls out a gun and starts firing at furniture and decorations in a drug-fueled rage, sending the entire party into chaos as everyone runs screaming from the house. Frank meets with his old co-workers to execute their plan of getting rid of Scoop. They drug him, load him onto a plane, and send him off to some remote, unknown location. At the same time, Sue and Vivian attend the Plastaware conference, where the salad tosser is finally being presented. To their dismay, Henrietta steals the spotlight, taking full credit for the idea and even co-opting Sue's personal story as her own. Frustrated and defeated, Sue and Vivian sneak off to get drunk and vent about the injustice. Meanwhile, Kevin is holed up in his room, terrified that Vic is going to come after him for what happened at the party. To his surprise, Vic pays him a visit, not with violence, but with understanding. He tells Kevin he doesn't blame him for anything that happened. This unexpected forgiveness helps Kevin begin to let go of the crushing guilt he's been carrying. Elsewhere, Bill visits Jimmy to check in. Jimmy surprisingly thanks Bill for taking him to the hospital after the van accident. While there, Bill meets Jimmy's younger sister, Bridget Fitzsimmons, and is immediately taken with her. Jimmy, however, warns him in no uncertain terms to stay away from her. Back at the airport, things go off the rails. Frank and his buddies think their scoop plan is wrapping up smoothly until the plane gets hijacked by a terrorist group. On live TV, Sue and Vivian spot Frank being held at gunpoint, and Sue frantically calls Kevin to pick her up. Vic hands over his car, and the whole family rushes to the airport to witness the unfolding chaos. In a wild turn of events, Scoop regains consciousness and stumbles out of the plane. With sheer brute force, he knocks out the hijackers, only to step directly onto a suitcase bomb. The explosion is massive, and one piece of laminated paper from Scoop's neck, the news article he always carried, flies through the air and lodges in the throat of Roger Dunbarton, killing him instantly. Miraculously, Frank survives, and he and Sue reconcile in the aftermath of the trauma. The kids, understandably shaken, except Maureen, who seems oddly unaffected, watch in stunned silence. Frank offers Bill some classic Murphy wisdom. Push it down and try not to think about it. Later that evening, Frank uses the money he got from selling their TV to buy back Sue's pawned locket. The episode ends with Sue and Frank third time, though humorously they're once again interrupted by a
Maybe I will. Come here, beautiful.
The Murphys watch old summer slides, and the living room wallpaper reminds Sue, now that she never finished the job. She bursts into tears because she feels she never finishes anything. The next morning, everyone heads to the Memorial Day parade that Frank has been eagerly anticipating so they can spend the day together, yet the family quickly scatters. Maureen accepts a last-minute role on the computer club float. Sue slips away to hand out flyers for her new carrot crisper. Bill dashes after Bridget, and Kevin peels off to meet Lex and Bolo, leaving Frank alone to defend their seats. While fending off a pushy onlooker, Jeffrey Dahmer, Frank Frank ends up in a shoving match. Maureen, annoyed that the club hides her as a space secretary behind the float just as they hide their disabled member inside a cardboard computer, climbs onto the main platform so she can be seen, yet her family isn't watching and Frank is too distracted. Sue's flyers promptly hit the pavement, so a cop fines her $100 for littering. Meanwhile, Bill is pummeled by Jimmy and Kevin soon passes out drunk on a fire hydrant. When the police officer, who turns out to be Jeffrey's father, tries to arrest Frank, he surveys the family's sorry state and decides their life is punishment enough, letting Frank go with a warning. That night, Sue tries finishing the wallpaper but breaks down in frustration. Frank walks in, sees her crying, and, struck silent, can only stand by, realizing how frayed the family has become. Frank can't take Sue's constant complaining, especially after the air conditioner breaks down. When she suggests a family trip to the movies, he invites the kids and their new neighbors, Chet and Nguyen, just to avoid being alone with her. Once there, Frank ditches Sue under the pretense of getting her a pizza, sneaking off to hang out with Chet instead, and leaving Sue with Nguyen. Meanwhile, Kevin excitedly shares a new song with his bandmates, only to be met with indifference. They confess they find his music too gloomy, and admit they're tired of progressive rock, especially after he tanked their last gig at Vic's with a 20-minute improvised song about his feelings. They decide to kick Kevin out so they can focus on writing songs that will help them attract girls. At the drive-in, Maureen claims she needs to use the bathroom, but she's actually sneaking off to read a computer magazine. This leaves Bill stuck waiting outside the restroom, causing him to miss the pre-show cartoon featuring his favorite character, Sleepy Ramirez. At an OBGYN appointment, Sue suddenly gets inspiration for a new invention, the forkuntala, a bizarre combination of a fork and spatula. She proudly pitches it to the neighborhood women, brushing off its clear design flaws and safety hazards. Although unimpressed and slightly horrified, the women are too intimidated to say no and reluctantly buy it. Kevin, meanwhile, is forced into summer school and immediately becomes a target for ridicule. His stern teacher, Mr. Durkin, reads aloud from Kevin's personal journal to humiliate him, but Kevin turns the tables with a sharp insult about Durkin being broke. Durkin had no money. The quip lands him in detention for the rest of the summer, but earns him the respect of the class. Back at the airport, Brandy Dunbarton takes over the airline and erects a gaudy, tone-deaf monument to her late husband and nephew. Frank and Rosie exchange bitter glances, both still harboring resentment toward the Dunbartons. Frank gets promoted to Chief of Ground Services, but there's a catch. He has to do both his old and new jobs with no raise. Meanwhile, Rosie, who everyone expected to take Frank's old role, is passed over. Furious and fed up with the lack of recognition, Rosie quits on the spot. Frank and Bob Pogo try to talk him down, but Rosie's done. Realizing he's the only steady income now, Frank returns home with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Chet tries to cheer him up by showing off his cheerful nursery plans for the new baby. Elsewhere, Bill and Philip head to the pool. Bill quickly ditches Philip to chase after Bridget Fitzsimmons. Things go sideways when Bill gets an erection in the water and refuses to get out during a thunderstorm evacuation. When he's eventually dragged out, his swim trunks come off. Utter humiliation, but to his surprise, Bridget finds the whole ordeal rebellious and bold, which earns him some unexpected cool points. It's Kevin's 15th birthday, but instead of a celebration, Frank puts him to work demolishing the nursery. While Frank heads off with Chet to buy lumber, Kevin's classmates from summer school swing by and invite him to skip out for the day. Kevin gives in and spends his birthday loitering downtown, smoking pot, and pulling juvenile stunts. At the lumber yard, Frank discovers that the wood they bought is warped. Chet suggests they hit up the army base where he has a hookup for quality lumber. After a few beers at the base bar and Chet shamelessly flirting with the waitress, he surprises Frank with an impromptu joyride in a fighter jet. Frank is both terrified and exhilarated by the chaotic flight. Back at home, Sue is hosting a sandwich-making get-together with the neighborhood women. She's crushed when she sees Marie casually tossing out her forkuntula. The other women finally admit the tool is poorly made and even dangerous. Realizing she guilted and pressured them into buying it, Sue feels ashamed. She sincerely apologizes and vows to rework the design into something that actually functions. Meanwhile, Bill becomes increasingly obsessed with Bridget Fitzsimmons, ignoring Philip and blowing off their usual hangouts. Philip, frustrated and jealous, snaps and physically attacks his own brother in a rare outburst of emotion. When they're caught, Bill tries to take the blame. Later, Philip confesses it was his fault and calls Bill his best boyfriend, in a hilariously heartfelt reconciliation. Rosie gets tired of how badly he and his co-workers are treated. With his wife's support, he decides to run for alderman, a local government leader. At the airport, Frank struggles to do both of his jobs at once. One day, he comes home covered in blood and feathers after a goose gets sucked into a plane engine and torn apart. Chet talks with the guys about the baby's room, but Frank gets annoyed when Vic starts becoming friends with Chet. Meanwhile, Kevin and his new friends are out causing trouble all over town. They go to the train tracks and destroy things by putting them in front of passing trains. When they try to put a cow on the tracks, Kevin panics and saves it. Sadly, the cow slips down a hill and falls into a tiger pit at the zoo. Back at home, the kids hang out in Bill and Maureen's room and watch a Jai-Alai match between men and women. Bill sneaks off to see Bridget but returns in time to see the end of the game. Sue is confused about why no one likes her for Kuntala. After getting bad reviews from the other women and learning that Vivian has quit, she feels hopeless. The kids are having fun watching the game, and their excitement brings the other women into the room to cheer. Even the men join in later. They all start betting, if the women win, the men have to do the chores for the week. The women win, and Nguyen Nguyen tells Chet he has to cook dinner for her tomorrow. Later, Sue goes to return a dish to the Stevensons' house. There, she overhears Chet yelling at Nguyen Nguyen for her comment. He gives her more chores and says she can't watch TV anymore. Shocked by how he treats her, Sue quietly leaves the dish and hurries home. As Frank gets ready for the annual 4th of July block party, Sue tries to talk to him about her worries over how Chet treats Nguyen Nguyen. Frank brushes it off and tells her not to get involved. Wanting the day to go smoothly, Sue keeps quiet. Frank makes his usual patriot punch, and soon Chet and Nguyen Nguyen arrive. Chet quickly gives Nguyen Nguyen a long list of things to get: the grill, charcoal, burgers, hot dogs, buns, and a block of ice. She quietly does it. When Sue sees her using the Forkuntala to break the ice, she tries to warn her again about Chet, but Nguyen Nguyen makes excuses for him. Maureen is upset about having to share a room with Bill while the baby's room is being built. During the cookout, her brothers ignore her, so she ends up watching Hobo Jojo with Philip and Anthony. Wanting to prove herself, she signs up to compete in a ring toss contest on the show. Kevin heads off with his friends to cause trouble. Moorhead steals beer and they crash a party at Claire's house where Kevin's old band is playing, with Ben now as the guitarist. Kevin is disappointed and left out. Meanwhile, Bill takes Bridget out for ice cream. On the way, she dares him to ride his bike into traffic. At the ice cream shop, some older kids tease Bridget. She demands Bill stand up for her or she'll dump him. Bill tries but gets beaten up after Bridget throws her ice cream at one of the bullies. Even though he's hurt and limping, she makes him give her a ride home and then breaks up with him anyway. Later, Sue suggests a men versus women softball game. When it's Sue's turn to bat, Chet is pitching. She hits a home run, and since she's pregnant, Nguyen Nguyen runs the bases for her while the women cheer. Angry that the women are winning, Chet throws the ball and accidentally hits a drunk Ginny in the face. Sue finally snaps and yells at him while the women rush to help Ginny. The men, except Mr. Holtenwasser, don't really step in. Frank loses his temper and scolds both Chet and Sue for ruining the party he worked hard to plan. The episode ends with a hungover Mr. Holtenwasser waking up next to Ginny, who then tries to seduce him by putting hot quarters where they definitely shouldn't go. The Murphy family heads to Lake Wawayanda for vacation, leaving Goomer to care for Major. At the cabin, they're horrified by its filthy condition and nickname, the Murder Cabin. Sue wants to leave, but Frank insists they stay. A storm forces them to clean the cabin and make the best of things. Sue's parents visit, and tensions rise when Frank and Stan argue during dinner. The kids get upset and storm off, blaming Frank. Left alone, Sue and Frank argue about his attitude and his bond with Chet. Sue then experiences stomach cramps from bad steak, making Frank panic and grab BBQ tongs to help. Thinking she's in labor, she laughs, and the two reconcile, realizing how much they still love each other. Kevin overcomes his fear of water after falling into a pool at the Wawayanda Inn and being saved by a janitor he mistakes for Frank. Bill, still sad over Bridget, argues with Frank and later burns her photo, accidentally starting a lake fire. Maureen sneaks off to practice ring toss and gets advice from a carny. Meanwhile in Rustvale, Goomer imagines life as Frank, dances with Sue's wedding dress, and lies to Evelyn about Frank abusing him. Evelyn comforts him. and they sleep together in the Murphys' bed. When the family returns, they find the baby's room finished with a note from Chet. In a twist, Chet secretly reports the Murphys to the city for the unauthorized home addition. The Murphys are ordered to tear down the baby's room after being reported by a concerned neighbor. Frank realizes it was Chet who smugly tosses a softball in the street. During Chet's pool party, Frank confronts him, but the neighbors side with Chet, leaving Frank furious. Later, at a 747 unveiling ceremony, Chet is revealed as the pilot, adding to Frank's frustration. Chet also flirts with Brandy, upsetting Nguyen. Sue comforts her, urging her to get help, but Nguyen insists she's slowly changing Chet. Sue and Frank later confront Chet again, and Frank demands a ceasefire.
Let's just call a ceasefire and steer clear of each other.
Chet agrees, but then reveals he's now in charge of pilot training, meaning he and Frank will be forced to work together moving forward. That night, Frank struggles to sleep and goes to the kitchen for beer and ice cream. He hears 2 angry voicemails from Chet telling him how to control his wife. Furious, Frank grabs a crowbar and Sue follows with the forcontala to confront Chet. But when they open the garage, police are already at Chet's house. They rush over and find Chet being taken to the hospital after Nguyen poisoned him with floor cleaner. She tells Sue she got tired of waiting for change and added the whole bottle, then says, "Book me Dano," as she's arrested.
Book me, Dano.
Frank and Sue are shocked, and then hear a message from Kevin at the police station. Kevin was arrested after trying to steal beer to impress girls at his band's gig. Later, Bill visits Bridget to return a box of her things, but is knocked out by Jimmy, who drags him into the woods. When Bill wakes up, Jimmy warns him to stay away from Bridget, calling her possessed. Bridget arrives, scares Jimmy off, and tells Bill their breakup was his fault. She swears revenge and spends the day harassing him, painting his bike pink, putting a pussy flag on it, and leaving fake poop notes in the newspapers he delivers. That night, Bill confronts her, calling her a psycho and telling her to leave him alone. Bridget starts crying and says no one cares about her. Feeling bad, Bill takes it back and they make up. She tells him to bring money next time for a hot dog and smokes. Kevin is bailed out of jail, but Frank is furious and scolds him harshly, claiming he'll never be a real man. Sue tells Frank to try a softer, more caring approach, but he refuses. After seeing Sue cry, Frank agrees, though he first insists on visiting Chet in the hospital to get answers. Frank plans to yell at Chet, but changes his mind when he sees how weak and sad Chet looks. Chet shares a painful memory about his abusive father and the loss of his childhood dog, which shaped who he became. He breaks down, realizing Nguyen isn't coming, and asks Frank to hold his hand. Chet warns Frank not to make the same mistakes. Before Frank leaves, Chet reveals a disturbing secret, causing Frank to walk away in disgust. Frank visits Kevin in the basement and tries to talk calmly, telling him he's smart enough to know he messed up. Kevin follows him to the kitchen, thinking Frank might hurt him. Frank struggles with this softer approach, but brings up how they used to be close. Kevin thinks Frank doesn't care about him, so Frank shares a painful story about his own dad mocking him during a school play, but Kevin falls asleep mid-story, frustrating Frank. They argue, with Kevin listing all the ways Frank has failed him. Frank, in anger, says he wishes he had one kid who wasn't a disappointment. Later, Bill hears Frank's comment and feels crushed. He visits Bridget, who tells him her dad found out about their relationship and got furious. After arguing, she suggests they run away to Pittsburgh. Bill is unsure, but after overhearing Frank again call him a disappointment, he agrees to go with her. Frank promises to watch Maureen on Hobo Jojo, where both she and Philip are picked to play ring toss, mainly because of Jojo's. While Philip misses, Maureen gets 2 rings in. But Jojo cheats by kicking the box, causing her final ring to miss. Maureen realizes what happened, and Philip kicks Jojo in the face in anger. Back home, Sue is furious that Frank failed to both support Kevin and watch Maureen on TV. Kevin mocks him. Maureen lies about Bill living in filth, and Frank finally snaps. He yells at everyone, grounds Kevin forever, tells Maureen to be a man, and storms off to punish Bill, only to find a note saying Bill ran away. As the family panics, Bill and Bridget wait at the train station to leave for Pittsburgh. Bill tries to run away with Bridget to Pittsburgh, but the latter bails and Bill soon escapes the train and faces one mishap after another trying to find a way back home while his family and friends band together to find him. While he's stranded, the whole neighborhood joins the search to find him before anything bad happens. Meanwhile, Rosie is juggling the pressure of his alderman debate. As everything unfolds, the episode closes with a surprising reveal. Frank's estranged father, William Murphy, is returning to Rustvale. Frank and William's long-simmering tension finally explodes during the intermission of Maureen's play. Despite Sue's concerns, the two keep drinking, and Frank tries to bait his father into admitting his abusive past by recalling a traumatic childhood moment. When William told him to get off stage, William denies it and brushes everything off with fake confusion and sarcasm, eventually mocking Frank by calling him Francine.
Francine?
That insult pushes Frank over the edge, triggering a heated public argument. The fight escalates in front of the audience, interrupting Maureen's performance. When William provokes Frank to hit him, Frank does, knocking him into a punch bowl and to the ground. The room is stunned. William looks up at Frank with shame, while Frank tries to justify himself by claiming William told him to do it. Mr. Ichikawa tries to de-escalate, but it's too late. The aftermath is heartbreaking. Sue, Bill, and Alice are visibly upset. Kevin stares in anger and loses all respect for Frank, and Maureen runs off the stage in tears. Frank, still fuming, is left speechless as the reality of what he's done begins to sink in. Sue helps William while giving Frank a look of complete disgust. Maureen is then left walking alone on the street with Frank attempting to apologize over what happened. However, Maureen insists that she was embarrassed since everyone, including her friends, saw the fight. Sue drives up to Maureen with Alice and the rest of the Murphy family to pick Maureen up. When Frank asks if Sue wanted him to drive, Sue, furious at Frank, tells him off to walk into traffic. Frank is then left walking by himself back home. Back at home, tensions stay high as Frank tries to explain himself to Sue, insisting that his issues with William are unresolved. But Sue, still furious, cuts him off and reminds him that one hug from his dad doesn't fix years of pain, and more importantly, that Frank humiliated their children, especially Maureen, in front of everyone. Frank tries again to justify his actions, but Sue won't hear it. She makes it clear that Frank is the one in the wrong. When Frank demands to know why she's not blaming his father, Sue coldly replies, "Because I'm not related to your father," and tells him to stop wallowing in self-pity. Pushed to the edge, Frank breaks down in a weak, self-defeated tone, eerily similar to William. Sue, fed up, tells Frank he's not sleeping in their bedroom. He scoffs, but when he tries to make things right with Maureen, she silently turns her back to him. With nowhere else to go, Frank walks through the neighborhood full of guilt and loneliness. He eventually stops at a phone booth and calls Bob Pogo, telling him he's ready to take the job in Cleveland, confessing that his family hates him. Pogo, unaware of the emotional weight behind Frank's words, excitedly starts talking about Cleveland in a post-credits scene, leaving Frank alone with his thoughts. As Sue goes into labor, she finds herself without help from the neighbors. Frustrated, she leaves a note for her family and drives herself to the hospital. Her car breaks down halfway, so she heads to a nearby bus stop on foot. There, while managing her contractions, she runs into Janet. When the bus arrives, Sue doesn't have enough fare, but Janet manipulates the driver into letting her ride. The bus drops her a mile from the hospital, forcing her to run the rest of the way. Along the way, she's mocked by Jeffrey on a bike until she knocks him over with a stick and steals the bike to finish her journey. At the hospital, Beatrice rushes Sue to labor and delivery, but Samantha interferes, pushing Lamaze over twilight sleep. Sue puts her foot down, insisting it's her body, her choice. She opts out of twilight sleep, but requests pain relief. Meanwhile, in Cleveland, Bob Pogo hears Sue is in labor and rounds up Rosie, Carl, Red, and Frank. Determined to stop Brandy from selling the airline, they rush to the airport. Despite a rough flight, they land safely, and Frank races to the hospital. Kevin finds Sue's note on the door after reconciling with Alice. Vic finds Cutie Pie, who's also in labor. She says the baby is his and that she's putting it up for adoption to keep her job. Vic proudly stays by her side. At home, Bill and Maureen arrive just as Big Bill shows up drunk, armed with a tire iron to confront Frank. They find Sue's note and rush to the hospital where Big Bill waits in the chapel. Frank arrives at the hospital and briefly sees his father, who emotionally admits his faults. Frank tells him they'll finish the conversation later and goes to Sue. He apologizes to her and is there when she delivers their baby girl. It's the first time Frank witnesses the birth of one of his children. Later, the whole family gathers around the newborn. Frank takes her to meet Big Bill in the chapel. As he introduces the baby, Big Bill suddenly clutches his chest, says, "Oh, here we go," and collapses, ending the episode in shock. Frank and Big Bill enjoy a peaceful fishing trip at sunset, finally sharing a warm, emotional moment. Frank tears up, saying he's glad they reconciled. Big Bill, staying true to form, mocks him for crying and growls, "I'll give you something to cry about. I'm gonna die on you now," right before clutching his chest and collapsing. Sirens wail as the scene cuts to the hospital, where doctors and Beatrice try desperately to save him. Frank stays by his father's side. Despite their efforts, and with Vic barging in proudly to show off his newborn son, Big Bill lives just long enough to whisper his cryptic last words, "Box 16.
Box 16.
Before passing away. Frank panics and tries to revive him, pounding his chest in front of the family. Sue quietly tells baby Megan, "Your father's not always like this." At Big Bill's funeral visitation, emotions are tense and chaotic. Frank is frustrated, not just by grief, but also by a hefty funeral invoice. Bill and Maureen bicker, Kevin pushes to let his band perform a tribute song, and Sue storms out, fed up with the family's behavior. As neighbors and Big Bill's old friends share heartfelt stories, Frank grows more irritated, clearly still conflicted about his father. Meanwhile, Father Pat casually tells Bill that as long as he gets last rites before dying, he's all forgiven, which Bill uses as a pass to keep annoying Maureen. Trying to escape her brother, Maureen hides in the embalming room where she meets Bobby, the mortician. Instead of being creeped out, she watches him embalm a body with interest. Bobby, impressed, talks to her about death and even gives her a glass eye as a souvenir, which she accepts without fear, having already been desensitized by past trauma. At the funeral home, Bill searches for Maureen and runs into Jimmy Fitzsimmons, who's dumpster diving with Bridget and their dad. Jimmy shares a rare moment of wisdom, saying that family is all you really have. Bill, still clinging to the idea that last rites erase all sins, begins to reflect on what matters. Meanwhile, Sue steps out for a cigarette but quickly hides it when Kevin storms outside to complain about Frank. Sue urges him to cut Frank some slack, he's grieving, and asks Kevin to try reconnecting with his dad. She even promises to quit smoking if he makes the effort. Inside, Frank's co-workers come to pay their respects. Bob Pogo announces that Brandy is selling Mohican Airways to a fried chicken skin chain called Skinny's. Outraged, the guys pelt him with deviled eggs and chase him out of the funeral home. Janet Vanderheim finds Frank and explains the 5 stages of grief, telling him he's stuck in stage 2, anger. She advises him to let it out. Frank takes her advice, steps outside, and screams a long overdue rant at his father into the sky. Feeling lighter, he gives a heartfelt eulogy. The next day at the cemetery, Kevin and his band perform Sky Grandpa at the burial. Frank appears composed, promising Maureen her birthday party is still on. At the bowling alley party, things seem okay, until Frank is handed custom monogrammed father and son bowling balls he ordered before Big Bill's death. It crushes him. He retreats into a photo booth, silently breaks down, and unknowingly prints out a strip of photos showing him mid-breakdown, entering the next stage of grief, depression. While on a school field trip to Fort Rustvale, Maureen and Bridget are bullied by Amy. In retaliation, Maureen uses her glass eye to scare Amy, which prompts Amy to vow revenge. During the tour, Phineas, now a guide, recounts the grim tale of the Rustvale massacre. Meanwhile, Bill, Jimmy, and Philip sneak off, run into a rival hockey team, and get into a scuffle. Frustrated by Amy, Bridget convinces Maureen to use her glass eye for witchcraft to curse her. The boys' fight leads to chaos. Jimmy's dad crashes the bus, which scares a donkey into kicking Phineas, who then lands on top of Amy. The boys are arrested for the fight and destruction of the historic site. Meanwhile, Mohican Airways is bought by Alaquippa and renamed Alahican. Rosie takes the buyout to focus on his role as alderman and fight the corrupt Mayor Tangenti's plans to destroy his neighborhood. Bob Pogo uses his buyout money to open Skinny's, a restaurant that sells only fried chicken skins, and happily prepares for opening day by de-skinning chickens in his rented space, formerly Captain Chuckle Crusts. At a staff meeting, Alaquippa Ed and Burke, now called Pogo, president of ground operations, introduce themselves and new rules, which Red and Carl hate. Frank tries to stay positive, but Red and Carl decide to take the buyout and move to Chatsworth to make. Frank asks Ed to keep the old ways, but Ed refuses and tells him the airport is a mess. Ed also orders Frank to come in for unpaid weekend training. When Frank threatens to take the buyout for his 20 years at Mohican, Ed reminds him he was fired and rehired.
You were fired last Christmas, and then you got rehired.
So technically, he only gets less than $50. Meanwhile, Sue meets her parents at Desegregate's country club with baby Megan, hoping to mend things before Thanksgiving. She wants her father Stan to make up with Frank and also invite her brother Louis, whom Stan disowned at Sue's wedding in 1958. Flashbacks show that Sue was hiding her pregnancy at the time, and after Stan overheard her telling Gert, back in the present, Marilyn convinces Stan to be polite to both Frank and Louis. Sue then tosses her cigarettes down the garbage disposal, proud of herself, until the cops drop off Bill after his arrest, and she tries to fish one back out. Meanwhile, Kevin meets Alice's dad, Dr. Irwin Goldman, a psychiatrist. Irwin annoys Alice with his comments about teen urges, but invites Kevin to dinner. The episode ends with Kevin and Irwin bonding over guitar and music. Frank shows up late to his 5:30 a.m. unpaid training shift at Allahyken on a rainy morning, where Ed and Burke scold him. Ed opens up about being a POW for 3 years in the Korean War and explains how he let go of his anger and moved forward. His story gets through to Frank, who slowly embraces the new system. Frank studies the handbook and works efficiently, eventually earning the Allahyken cufflinks of competence. At home, Goomer asks about Big Bill's belongings and Frank tells him to toss everything. But later, while walking baby Megan, Frank finds a box labeled 16 by the curb and takes it inside. He calls his sister Nora, hoping to uncover what box 16 means. Nora is indifferent, only asking for an ashtray from their dad's honeymoon and telling Frank to stop digging into the past. Meanwhile, Bill, Jimmy, and Philip are forced to join the Boys in Blue Junior Officer program. Over 8 weeks, corrupt officers teach them how to use force and misuse authority. While working security at a concert, Bill lies to one of the officers, claiming a man has marijuana after being mocked. Kevin, attending the same concert with Alice, becomes overly clingy when he hears about her ex. Annoyed, Alice gives him the silent treatment on the way home. Vic tries to turn his life around by getting sober and stepping up as a dad to Vic Jr. However, Cutie Pie makes it clear she's not interested in parenting and leaves Vic for skee-ball, saying the baby was his idea. Outside, Vic opens up to Frank about the tough road ahead as a single father. Meanwhile, Bob Pogo launches Skinny's, his chicken skin-only fast food restaurant. Dressed like Colonel Sanders, he proudly reveals a menu full of greasy, gross items. Chicken skin milkshakes included. His only visitor is a guy who just wants to use the bathroom. When Bob denies him access, the man leaves. Alone and defeated, Bob weeps while eating his own product and sadly presses the customer served button over and over. At home, Maureen reads about ritual sacrifices in an effort to contact Big Bill's ghost and win back Frank's affection as his princess. Tired of babysitting Megan, she hands her off to Frank and rushes to the cemetery with Bridget. Their spooky seance is cut short when Bobby unexpectedly rises from a grave to grab his lost wristwatch, sending the girls fleeing in terror. Elsewhere, Sue visits Louis at a gay bar next to Skinny's. She apologizes for outing him years ago and invites him to Thanksgiving. Louis declines once he learns Stan will be there. Desperate, Sue lies and says Stan is dying. Moved by this, Louis agrees to come, setting the stage for a very awkward holiday dinner. Frank and Sue sit their older kids down for a serious talk about their reckless behavior the night before. They each get a punishment. Sue takes Maureen to church to break her obsession with witchcraft, while Frank sends Kevin out with Smokey and keeps Bill with him for the day. The episode then splits into 4 parts, one for each kid and one for the family when they all regroup. Sue takes Maureen and baby Megan to church where they meet Father Pat. While Sue waits in the pews, Father Pat talks to Maureen about how witchcraft is sinful and that she should focus on baby Jesus, especially with Christmas around the corner. Maureen, however, confuses Christmas with Easter. Father Pat tries to explain communion, that the body and blood of Christ are just bread and cheap red wine, not actual flesh and blood. Suddenly, Dick Sawitsky and Jimmy walk in. Jimmy tries to clarify that the wine becomes blood through transubstantiation. Maureen gets more confused as the adults begin arguing about theology, bouncing between topics like Jesus' conception, whether Mary Magdalene or the Virgin Mary was his mother, and how Jesus could be both God's son and God himself. Jimmy even uses his chest tattoo to illustrate his bizarre logic, that God is the father of everyone, including Jesus and Mary. Sister Layla joins the chaos and adds her own interpretation, that God spiritually impregnated Mary, making Jesus his own father.
His own father!
Maureen's confusion turns to frustration. She finally breaks down and admits she just wanted to talk to her grandpa Big Bill's ghost so she could feel like Frank's princess again. Sue overhears this, steps in, and hugs Maureen to comfort her. Father Pat, clearly flustered, storms out muttering that people always question the Catholic Church. Sue gathers the girls and leaves, putting an end to Maureen's theological meltdown. Frank brings Bill to the police station to talk to the officers who were teaching the boys. Frank is angry because the officers let the boys break the law, but one officer, Glanny, blames Frank and says it's his job as a father to teach Bill right from wrong. This makes Frank remember what Sue told him the night before, so he takes Bill out to give him the talk. Frank has a hard time explaining it, but Bill admits he already knows because he saw his parents once. Frank is shocked and makes Bill promise not to tell Sue. At the same time, Smokey takes Kevin out and complains that the Murphys always bring their problems to him. Kevin sings a long, sad song about Alice, which annoys Smokey. He drops Kevin off and tells him life is full of pain. Smokey is later seen taking of the bowling alley vending machines. That night, the Murphy family goes bowling together. While the younger kids play arcade games with Sue, Kevin is sad about Alice and not doing well at bowling. Frank gives him Big Bill's bowling ball, and Kevin finally knocks down a pin. Frank tells Kevin about his own first breakup and how he met Sue. Kevin realizes he should stop stressing about Alice and let things happen on their own. Frank and Sue feel hopeful and make plans for Christmas. As Frank heads to the restroom, he finds a locker marked 16 and opens it. Inside, he finds tapes that belong to his dad. Frank sits down, smiling as he listens to the tapes. Frank stays up all night listening to his dad's cassette tapes, but doesn't find anything special in them. He falls asleep and wakes up just in time to hear a message from his mom. She and Eileen are flying in for the Christmas party. Kevin tells Frank that Ed called and everyone needs to be at work in 5 minutes. Frank quickly gets ready and takes the tapes with him to listen in the car. On one of the tapes, his dad talks about how selling typewriter ribbon gave his life meaning after he lost his store. At work, Ed holds a meeting. He says the company isn't making money since the merger. He shows a strange ad that shows 2 planes crashing in the sky, which hurt the company's image. Ed says the ad was a mistake and that Stanley Kubrick was given too much freedom. Because of this, no one will get a Christmas bonus, which upsets everyone. He tells the workers that anyone who can fix the company's image and help raise profits will get a bonus and a promotion. At home, Frank starts thinking of ideas. After watching a TV show about a daredevil named Buster Thunder Jr., he gets an idea. Have Buster jump over a Boeing 747 on live TV on Christmas Eve. Sue leaves Kevin in charge of baby Megan while she takes Bill and Maureen shopping. Kevin isn't supposed to be near Alice or anyone Jewish because of a restraining order, but he stays home with Megan. While out, Sue visits Louis at his karate school to say sorry for lying. Louis forgives her quickly because his next class starts soon. Sue invites him to the Christmas party, and he agrees to come. Vic, wearing a karate outfit, sees Sue and reminds Louis that Sue once helped him and his friends with parenting tips. He suggests that Sue start her own class. Louis offers her time slots on Monday and Wednesday afternoons,
and I don't have any classes Monday and Wednesday afternoons.
And she happily agrees. While this happens, Bill helps Officer O'Rourke direct traffic while the officer goes to the bathroom. Maureen walks to a nativity scene and sticks her glass eye into the baby Jesus statue, which had one missing eye. Back at home, Kevin and baby Megan go for a walk. Kevin plays guitar for her, and they bond. When Sue, Maureen, and Bill return home, the family feels happy. The next day, Kevin helps Sue at her first baby class by singing a song that's okay for babies. Alice walks by and sees this. It touches her heart. Elsewhere, Bob Pogo teams up with Rosie to stop the mayor, Tangenti, and Gagliardi from destroying their neighborhood. After Rosie sees a wrecking ball start to destroy Casper's lounge, he feels hopeless and takes his daughter Nina to the mall to see Santa. On the way home, the cops stop him for no real reason and give him a fake ticket. it from the mayor. Rosie stays calm for Nina's sake, but is clearly upset. Later that night, Rosie meets with Bob under a bridge. Rosie is angry, but Bob shares his big plan. They're going to expose the mayor and Gagliardi live on TV at the airport, with help from Jim Jeffords. At the Murphy family Christmas party, everyone is having fun and singing Christmas songs. Goomer tries to say sorry to Evelyn after their fight on Thanksgiving. He impresses her with his singing, and they make up. Then they both surprise the guests by revealing that their real names are not Goomer or Evelyn, which confuses everyone. Ginny, feeling sad because Louis and Otto didn't like her flirting, gets drunk. She meets Eileen, who really likes her. As Frank gets ready to leave for the airport to meet Buster Thunder Jr., his mom scolds him and says he's just like his dad. Frank stands up for Big Bill, saying that even though his dad was mean, he tried to make things better before he died. Frank says a man's job gives him purpose and pride. Meanwhile, Bill is helping officers Glanny and O'Rourke with the Boys in Blue program at a local prison to scare young troublemakers. Nguyen scares the kids so much that one even pees his pants. On the way back, Bill sees the officers stop Rosie for no reason and treat him badly. Nina looks really scared, and Bill starts to understand how unfair and broken the police are. Back at home, Bill takes off his junior police hat and throws it away. Then he grabs a beer from the fridge, takes a drink, and starts complaining about life, just like his dad does. Frank meets Buster Thunder Jr. at the airport the night before Christmas Eve to go over the plan for the big jump. Before leaving, Buster invites Frank for a ride in his motorhome. As they drive past the hospital, Buster notices Frank looking sad. Frank tells him that his father died recently. He also explains that if the jump goes well, he'll get a bonus at work, and that he thinks his dad's final message was that work gives life meaning. Buster tells Frank to stop worrying so much and tries to cheer him up by speeding down an empty road for fun. The next day, the whole town comes to the airport to see the big stunt. As part of his pre-jump routine, Buster drinks and smokes a lot, then passes out. After a while, he wakes up and gets ready to jump. But when he sees that the ramps are placed at the very front and back of the 747 instead of the sides, he gets upset. Ed says they set it up that way so the Alla Heiken logo would look better on camera. Buster refuses to do the jump and gets ready to leave. Frank begs him to stay and convinces him to do the jump anyway. Buster agrees, but decides to do it 20 minutes earlier than planned. Frank tries to stop him, but Buster races off, scaring the other performers. They panic and climb a shaky speaker tower, which starts to fall apart. Nearby, Gagliardi is about to shoot Rosie, but the TV camera crew notices and starts filming. Bob Pogo jumps in to protect Rosie and ends up getting shot in the stomach. Frank sees the chaos happening and tries to stop Buster, but it's too late. The crowd in the beer tent climbs the speaker towers too, causing them to collapse. Buster completes the jump successfully, landing safely as everyone watches in shock and amazement. During a live interview right after, he yells at the crowd, saying he's tired of risking his life just to entertain people. He says he's retiring and only did the stunt so Frank could get a promotion. Then, because he's part Cherokee, he insults Alla Heiken's name, swears at the cameras, and walks off. At the grandstand, Gagliardi meets with Mayor Tangenti and tells him that the workers who built the speaker towers didn't use nuts to secure the bolts. It was done on purpose. Gagliardi then offers the mayor a bribe to keep quiet about it. Behind the grandstand, Jim Jeffords, along with Bob and Rosie, tries to sneak a hidden camera tape into the ABS sports truck. The tape shows Gagliardi bribing the mayor. Jim wants to use it to get revenge for the way Tangenti ruined his career by making up the story about his pregnancy fetish. Before they can play the tape, Gagliardi and Tangenti show up and point guns at them. Gagliardi gets ready to shoot Rosie, but a nearby cameraman catches the whole thing on video. Bob tries to talk his way out of it by asking them to shoot Rosie instead of him, but ends up getting shot in the stomach himself. Just then, the weak speaker towers fall. Bob is taken into an ambulance. He is now paralyzed from the waist down, but tells Rosie he wants to become a better man, even if he has to live in a wheelchair. As the ambulance doors close, he asks the paramedics if he can get a feeding tube put in. The next day, Mayor Tangenti announces that he is stepping down from office, which makes Rosie and his family very happy. It's revealed that Tangenti was arrested and charged with bribery and helping with attempted murder thanks to the video Jim gave the news team. Jim also gets his old job back as the news anchor. The tollway project that was going to destroy Rosie's neighborhood is officially canceled. Back in the Murphys' neighborhood, Ginny leaves her kids with Greg and drives off to California with Eileen and Nora. Mr. Holtenwasser is thrilled to see her go. Kevin makes up with Alice and apologizes to her family. On Christmas Day, the neighbors and the Murphys open their presents. Everyone is happy, except Frank. He's upset because not only did he not get his bonus, but he also got demoted to a lower job with half the pay. Feeling angry and hopeless, Frank talks to his dead father in his head and says, "Work didn't make me happy." Sue and the kids get fed up with his bad mood. Sue reminds Frank that they've been supporting him for weeks, but he still blames everyone else. Frank snaps and says it's the world's fault his life is terrible. His shouting makes baby Megan cry. Sue then says that if Frank wants to leave, nobody is stopping him. So Frank walks out of the house. He goes to a local bar and runs into Dick Sawitsky. Frank vents about how his father's final words, Box 16, have been driving him crazy. Dick tells him that Big Bill was talking about Johann Sebastian Bach's Prelude and Fugue No. 16, his favorite song. In the 1930s, it was used as a jingle for White House beer on the radio. Big Bill would meet Dick at that same bar every Christmas, get drunk, and sing the jingle. He even wanted the song played at his funeral. Frank gets annoyed. He spent 2 months thinking Box 16 had deep meaning, but it was just a song request. He calls his father a selfish bastard.
You're here drinking on Christmas.
Dick tries to defend Big Bill, saying he wasn't evil, he just didn't know how to be a father. Frank, clearly frustrated, asks if it's really that hard not to treat your kids badly. Dick throws the question back at Frank and says, "Well, you're drinking alone in a bar on Christmas instead of being with your family. So what's your excuse?" Frank realizes he's right. He leaves the bar, heads to the cemetery, and plays Bach's Prelude and Fugue No. 16 at his father's grave. When the song ends, he tosses the cassette tape onto the grave and walks away, finally feeling some peace and letting go of the past. Frank tells Sue that he finally found out what Box 16 means. He says his parents were two very broken people who ended up together and made him. He says sorry to Sue and promises to try harder and be a better man. The family then sits down for dinner, eating pigs in blankets. Just as Frank is about to say something to his family, the phone rings. Everyone pauses, waiting for him to blow up like he usually does during dinner, like in Bleedin' in Sweden. Kevin quickly covers baby Megan's ears, expecting Frank to shout something rude, but instead, Frank calmly picks up the phone, presses the button, and leaves it off the hook. Sue looks at him and asks if maybe the call was something important or if someone might be hurt. Frank looks at her and says, "The most important thing is family." As the Murphys enjoy their dinner together, the camera slowly pulls back to show the whole neighborhood. The episode, and the series, ends. So that will be it from us. If you enjoyed the video, let us know which character was your favorite. Also, do not forget to leave us a like and subscribe to our channel for similar content. Thanks for watching. We'll see you at the next one.